Hi, Jane.
Well, hello there.
Hi. It's so nice to see your face in a live setting too, because I feel like most of the time when we speak, it's with pre-recorded videos and probably a lot of love letters and confessions from me to you, with the occasional video that you've made for my daughter in your little puppet show for her birthday, which will
Oh, yes,
forever.
that was so sweet.
I can't tell you how sweet that was. We still watch it, and it's definitely treasured in our home. So thank you, and it's so lovely to see your face. And I want to start by cheersing you and congratulating you for this incredible award that is so well deserved. I'm clink. I'm having tea. You're probably having bourbon, but it's also only 10:30 in the morning for me, so I have an excuse.
Now, this is Scotch.
My apologies. Scotch.
Not that filthy drink. Good old British Scotch.
Another reason why you're such an inspiration, teaching all of us the beauty of balance, if you will. So obviously this is a tremendous honor, but I have to say humbly, there's no better recipient than you. And you know how I feel about you.
Probably unjustified. You don't know me.
Well, that's the beauty of feeling like you know someone, even if I guess you don't on a personal level. But I do think that what I'm saying is probably pretty accurate, and there's nobody who's kind of moved the needle in every arena that I can possibly think of like you have. So thank you for your work in every space. It's hard for me to pick a space. It's hard for me to say thank you for your, animal advocacy, or for being such, an environmental warrior, or for advocating for youth. Or it's hard for me to pick one space, because what you've done so beautifully is you've merged them all together, and you've proven that existing in one space actually doesn't help the other, that it's all about coexisting together. And I haven't ever really had the opportunity to ask you some questions. So I'm also really excited just to be able to chat with you, to ask you a couple of things like, you've worked so closely with animals, and sort of shining a light on their perspective and the soul and spirituality and importance of valuing our animals. But what do you feel this has taught you about humanity?
Well, first of all, for me, from a tiny little girl, apparently, it was animals, 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 animals. And I had, by the time I was, I think, about 10 years old, I had a very wise teacher. He's always here behind me. And that was Rusty, the dog. And you know what was strange about Rusty? He wasn't our dog. And yes, he lived in a hotel around the corner. And thank goodness it's not now, because they put a stupid main road between our house and that hotel. But back then it was quite quiet. He would come in the morning at about 6 o'clock and bark outside the door. And my aunt would let him in. He'd run up, jump on my bed. And we booted him back at lunchtime. We never fed him. And then he came back after lunch. And until we booted him out finally at 10:30. So the hotel knew that he came, but they didn't mind. They didn't really care. And he was two different dogs. One in the hotel, they had to tie him to a table leg because he was always stealing food. And then when he came here, he was just a model of good behavior. I mean, I taught him, and I've had dogs all my life. Well, I can't while I'm traveling, but, before that. And he was different. I swear he was sent to teach me. And it was very, very strange. He behaved in a way other dogs have not behaved. Anyway, he was my childhood companion. And so long before I met the chimpanzees, I knew that when the scientists told me that animals didn't have personalities and I shouldn't talk about their minds capable of problem solving, and I certainly shouldn't talk about them having emotions, because we were different. Science, actually, this is back in the early 60s, science was teaching that we humans were totally separated from the rest of the animal kingdom. And, we were on a sort of pedestal, and there was this gap. Fortunately, the chimpanzees, because they're biologically so like us, changed that. And gradually science came to realize that, we're part of and not, as was thought, separate from the rest of the animal kingdom. And Rusty taught me that.
I'm probably going to butcher this story, so forgive me in advance, but my grandfather, who was a very well-known and respected surgeon, he was the chief of surgery at a major hospital in Los Angeles. Part of what he devoted his life to outside of just operating on humans was donating his time to operate on animals. And the chimpanzee advocacy that he was a part of was all surrounding the idea that animals that have a type of self-awareness like chimpanzees do, especially animals with this self-awareness, should not be caged and tested on, which at the time, like your work, at the time for him was really controversial because nobody was, supporting that theory, and very supportive of the separation of animals and people. But I remember hearing from a really young age about these chimpanzees through him and how he brought that type of awareness to his community as well, from their idea of awareness, spatial awareness, social awareness. So that's part of why I've always been so drawn to you and your work. I think that it creates a deeper understanding of who we are when we recognize through compassion the health and well-being of another species, and also through experiential learning, which is what you do so well. And I would just love to ask you about that for 1 second, because I don't know when I'll have this opportunity again, and it does make me want to cry. Just talking about children and how I really believe that the only way children will ever develop that level of connection and compassion is through experiential learning and seeing and being on the ground in these spaces with their hands in the soil, with their understanding of how the life cycle works with plants, with animals. And I get really scared living in this digital age that we're in, with everything being a connection through a device or an iPad or a computer. I get really scared for our children. And I know now I've combined like 5 questions, but I want to talk about your book because, you talk about hope in this book, and I want to ask you about hope, and I want to ask you about children and experiential learning and what gave you the understanding and the notion that we need children to have their hands in the soil and their arms around, and hearts around these animals to really become as human as they possibly can.
Well, first of all, when I grew up, this is way back. I mean, it was 1934 I was born. And so when I was growing up, there was no television that hadn't been invented. We were in the middle of World War II. We learned to value everything and take nothing for granted. Like every meal, we never knew people that we knew were being killed. One of my uncles was shot down in his plane in the war. And your uncle was a surgeon, so was mine. That's really interesting. My uncle, my mother's brother, he was a senior consultant surgeon in a big London hospital. And so he let me watch operations when I was, I think, about 12, 13, something like that. And the first time I watched an operation, I nearly fainted. And it turned out it was nothing to do with my squeamishness. It was because he positioned me right where the exhaust fumes from the anesthetic came out. So I basically anesthetized, but I learned about the human body from that, the things that could be done, the things people could recover from. And of course, when I went to Gombe, it was because I loved animals and I loved wild animals, and I wanted to go to Africa, and I would have studied any animal under the sun. And it was Dr. Louis Leakey who gave me the chance to study chimps. But when I got out there, and the chimpanzees are so like us, we share 98.6% of our DNA with them, and they kiss, embrace, hold hands, pat one another on the back. They show warlike behavior. They're altruistic, show love and compassion. So like us. But the science wasn't prepared to believe this. And I'd learned all that already from my dog, Rusty. Here he is behind me. And so I went out into the field knowing that animals have personalities, minds, and feelings. And I think my first lesson in how to get on in a world where people are against you is don't confront them, don't be aggressive. And so when I was trying to persuade these Cambridge scientists, when I finally got there to do a PhD, I told stories about the chimps. I didn't argue with them when they told me that, animals didn't have personalities, minds, or emotions. I told stories. And then my first husband, Hugo van Lauwijk, he came and he was taking film. And gradually, science changed. It had to change because, there's all this similarity between them and us. And it goes on down the rest of the animal kingdom. And I had this wonderful mother who told me from the start that she gave me the courage really to be who I am. And she told me, if you meet somebody who doesn't agree with you, first listen to them, because maybe they've got some points that you've never thought of. But if in the end you believe that you're at least righter than they are, then you've got to have the courage of your conviction. So it was a mixture of believing that I was right because of Rusty, and the chimps, adding to that because they're so like us biologically, and finding a way to change science without becoming aggressive. And I think that was the key. I think that's the most important thing. So how do you change people? You tell stories. And my ancestors were Welsh. So the Welsh are really, they have the gift of the gab, telling the right story to people. And a lot of people in high positions, they weren't going to be influenced by a young girl. No, absolutely not. But if you can reach the heart, so that, and never mind if they change their mind, not because of you don't know always, but so telling stories, reaching people's hearts, that's how I believe that we have to change the world.
You wouldn't know this because why would you, but I write a lot about your philosophy with with building bridges as a way of moving the needle forward in the activism space, and not acting as islands, but instead finding connection and not crusading, but talking. And the reason one of the many reasons why I just feel like you're such a hero is because you've really, pioneered that way of affecting change. And I'm so grateful that you just told me that story, just to hear it from your own mouth, because I've read about it and I've seen documentaries on your life, and I've showed up at the Hollywood Bowl to hear you speak.
Oh,
and
you were there. Wow.
Oh, of course I was there. I was there, and then I wrote about it, and then I cried about it, and then I spoke about it. Of course I was there. I've really sort of followed along on your journey for so long, really starting with that notion that we don't create change when we're coming at it from an aggressive place or from a righteous place. And I love the story that you told once about working with these larger oil companies and keeping a seat at the dinner table, because the ability to change one person's mind who thinks differently than yours is so much stronger than yelling at a crowd of hundreds or thousands or millions when it falls on deaf ears. And so I've always had that mentality in my own work. And obviously next to you, I'm a little micro baby activist, but in whatever work I can participate in, I always start with the notion of, is this, it sounds on a subconscious level, is this the Jane approach? And I know in myself that when I come at something and I'm feeling really self-righteous, or like I want to talk at people instead of sharing with people and listening to people, that it's probably not going to have the same impact or long-lasting impact of any kind. So that was like really special hearing you speak about that. But I think beyond anything that you could possibly do, that will be the most impactful lesson that can be taught and heard from people, is how to create change. You do it by keeping a seat at the dinner table, by holding hands with people you disagree with and listening to their stories too, not just sharing stories. So thank you for that.
With one story I should share with you. Maybe you've heard it, I don't know, because I have written about it. The taxi driver, did you remember?
No.
Well, I was going.
Give me something new.
Yeah, very early in the morning, going to Heathrow. And I was totally exhausted. And I thought, I'll have a nice snooze. It was a 30-minute drive. And the cab driver, he knew who I was. Somebody had told him, the hall porter, I think. And he said, oh, you people. He said, you're like my sister. I've got no time for people like you. You care about animals. There's all these humans suffering. And he went on and on like this. I sat forward on the jump seat, in the London black cabs. And I told him stories. I told him stories about the chimps. I told him that we worked with children, that we were trying to improve the lives of people living around the sanctuary, around the national park, because if you're living in poverty, you cut the trees down to survive, or you hunt because you got to eat. But he was grumpy. And so I thought, well, never mind. I got there. And at the airport, neither of us had any change. So the amount of money he owed me, I would think in today's terms, it would be about £30, something like that. And so I said, well, never mind. Donate that money to your sister for her work, because she went to animal shelters. And I didn't think he would. I thought he'd go and drink it in the pub with his friends and rant on about this stupid woman who was only interested in chimpanzees. Got back after 2 weeks, and was a letter from his sister. And she said, first of all, I want to thank you for your donation. Secondly, what did you do to my brother? She said, he's been 3 times to help me in the shelter, and he's interested, and he's telling his buddies in the pub. So that was pure luck that I knew that my talk with him had borne fruit. I wouldn't have known otherwise. So I try and take every possible advantage, however tired I am, to talk to people, because we need everybody in this fight to save the planet, don't we?
Wow. That was really, really special. Thank you. It's true. I mean, you never know where a conversation will lead. And luckily now, I guess one of the perks of the digital age that we're in is that there is a bit more of an ability to connect with people that maybe you've touched even from a distance, that's really cool too. But having a direct line of communication with his sister after that it's true. And it can be like the least likely person, like a grumpy taxi cab driver. It's not like speaking to a room full of anxiously awaiting patient, teenagers who are like there to participate in Roots and Shoots. It's true. You never know, which is like just such a testament to your generous spirit, because it does take generosity. It takes energy. Where do you find the energy? I mean, you're still going. You don't feel like giving up. You don't feel like you've lost your steam and fuel. I mean, sometimes I feel like I've lost my steam and fuel. So what do you think? Is it like feeling recharged by the animals or by the children, or what do you think it is?
I'm charged in various ways. And sometimes I'm so tired, but there's always, I was given a gift, two gifts actually. One is a gift of communication, so talking and writing. And the other is a gift of a pretty tough body, which I inherited from my father. And so, yeah, what did you ask me?
How do you feel recharged? How do you?
Oh, yes, right. I sort of started thinking about my father. So basically, three ways. One, the young people. I mean, they're so, once they get the idea and once you empower them to act, they're so amazingly energetic and passionate, and we can change the world and they're not going to give up, And secondly is seeing the result of some of the things we've done, like the sanctuaries for orphan chimps, like the program to improve the lives of the people living around national parks so that they become our partners. That's our Take Care of Tukari program. Out in the forest, where I felt this deep spiritual connection with the natural world, and I still keep that within me when I get really tired. But then finally, there is this spiritual power. And sometimes I've been so tired at the beginning of a lecture, I think I can't get my thoughts in order. I give up. So I sort of open my mind and say, come on, you put me in this place, help. And it's quite scary because sometimes, this hasn't happened very often, but when it has, I can stand back and see myself lecturing. And that's really dangerous, because if you start wondering what you're saying and why you're saying it, poof, I don't know what would happen. But it's sometimes the best lectures I've given are when I'm so tired that I just open my mind up to some spiritual power. And that spiritual power is what I feel so strongly in the forest.
Wow. Yeah, it kind of goes back a little bit to like experiential learning and talking about how important it is for children to really have those moments where they can connect with nature and have that space and time to let their minds expand and, you know.
Because the big problem now is our disconnect with the natural world. The young people spending all their time on cell phones and video games and social media, and it's really scary. And so, our Roots and Shoots program for youth, a lot of it is directed for the younger children, trying to get them out into nature. And once you get a child out into nature, it's amazing the effect it has on them, And also when you allow them, Roots and Shoots, we don't tell them what to do, they choose. As a group, they choose a project help people, project help animals, project help the environment. And they get to choose, not all of them the same, but between the group, they cover those three, or one big project that covers the whole thing. And so, once children are empowered and you listen to them and you encourage them, they very quickly change. At least that's what I've found. And particularly if you go into an inner city area. I remember taking a group of African Americans from a very poor neighborhood out towards the river. And they lived near, but they'd never been to the river before. And so they had a little net each, and they pulled little wriggly things out of the water, and they were absolutely fascinated. Then, of course, they had to put them back. And the 18-year-old who was in charge of this group started off, he was a hood and he was dreadlocks and he was just really tough and he didn't want to be there, but somebody told him he had to be. And to see him change when he got out on the river, we took him in a punt, and a swan came up rather angry, which could be scary, but luckily it wasn't. And his whole, everything about him changed, and he was filled with wonder. And then afterwards, he took me round. I was able to get back. He took me round about 4 different very, very poor schools in the area to talk to the kids. And it's amazing.
All I want is to be able to, if I could quit my job and just work for you and work for Roots and Shoots, that's what I'd like to spend my life doing. If I've done anything right, it's making sure that my daughter is surrounded by nature. And when I hear you speak about this, it just reinforces how important that is for all children everywhere, and children who don't have the opportunity because they're living in, big cities and cement jungles, and how important it is to get them into nature or bring nature to them.
Yep.
In any, it's not about like 6-month-long immersions. It can be, an afternoon with tadpoles, as you're saying. It can be just a moment. We're so drawn as human beings to nature because we know that that's where we came from, and that's where we belong, and that's where we're happiest, and that's where our mental health strives. We're so drawn to it that it just takes a little tiny droplet to reintroduce that to our palates and remind us of how important it is. And with children, it's just, everything that you're saying is just gold. So offline, if I have the opportunity, because I do have your email and your team, I just would love to speak with you about ways that we can support you further. And obviously, my husband's foundation, the Ian Somerhalder Foundation, we've connected and we've been a part of this grant, and now the Templeton Prize, which is so wonderful and a lovely grant for you as well. And, there's so many ways to support, though, not just through grants. There's also just physical on the ground, being there and helping with your space and being a support system of any kind, amplifying your work. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. It was hard for me to not cry when you speak, not because I'm sad at all, but just because everything you say touches me so deeply as a mom, as a human, as an animal and earth advocate, and just as your biggest fan. So,
well, I think I've written to you and sent a video as to how grateful I am to you too for the donation, the wonderful donation that you made to help us develop this youth program, Roots and Shoots, which is what I'm putting my most passion into, actually, because this is the future. And I don't know if you hear this, but sometimes I hear, oh, it's, the children, they're responsible for making the world, but it's not their responsibility, it's ours. Right. They have messed it up. So we just have to give them the courage and the tools and the confidence to go out there and make a difference. It doesn't all have to be nature. It could be like helping communities. We use art, we use theater, drama, you name it. It's rather like the roots of a tree that go into all kinds of different underground areas in order for the tree to grow. So Roots and Shoots is growing from every kind of environment, from inner city to Ivy League.
It's so wonderful, Jane. It's really so wonderful what you're doing. I don't think that there's anything else out there that's like it. And I love when you talk about confidence, because I think there's an understanding of what confidence means for a child that has to do with ego and inflation. And really what I've seen, and I know that this is so true for you too in your work, is that confidence to me actually comes from what a child feels and sees when they know their power and impact in the world. And it can be as simple as when you plant a seed and then you water that seed and then they watch it grow, and in 2 or 3 days there's a sprout, and they take care of that seed and they watch it grow into a plant, and then suddenly a tomato's on that plant and they can pick it and eat it. That's the association I feel that's the most long lasting with children, with their confidence, because it's not a temporary like boost of an ego or somebody complimenting you saying, oh, you're good at this, or you've done that well. It's their own understanding of their power. That's true power. And it's also powerlessness. You know what I mean? It's like you're a part of something greater, but you're also solely responsible at times. I think it's because I have a 3-year-old that I'm always crying. Must be, but it's true.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's my fault. It happens. I know one of our board members looked at me and very strangely after a lecture, and he said, if I came down from another planet and I was just looking at what was going on here, I'd say to myself, well, she looks kind of gentle and peaceful. So why is everybody crying?
It's true. It's true. It is your fault, actually. It's all your fault.
Oh my God, I know. I can't help it though.
It's because what you're doing is just so deeply powerful, and it reminds all of us what it feels like to be human and want to be better humans.
Always
And
want
that's
to be better humans. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Thank
Yep.
you. I appreciate you. I know you have to go. I already stole 7 minutes more time with you than I was even gifted to begin with. So I should probably wrap this up. How selfish of me. Grateful to know you, grateful to see you, grateful for you always being recognized in all the ways that you deserve and more. Well,
I want to thank you and your husband both, because it's people like you that, you know, are so generous, and it really makes a difference, because I'm sure you know how difficult fundraising is, especially now. But anyway, so thank you, and thank him for me.
I sure will. I think it's hopefully just only the beginning of that. If there's anything we can do that's right in this world, it's directing everything to you. So
well, I wouldn't have got where I've got
you.
if it wasn't for people like you, that I can promise you. And my amazing mother and my dog and my uncle, who was also a surgeon. I mean, surrounded by amazing people. So thank you. The next time it'll be in person.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Yes, okay. And here's the last cheer. Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.
And you see what's on my glass? Can you see?
I think lift it up a little bit more into the camera. What is that? It's a chimp. Ah!
A chimp. Isn't that lovely? Especially made for me.
Wouldn't expect anything else than you drinking scotch out of a chimp glass.
Scotch and a chimp all together. I mean, wow.
Thank you, Jane.
Love to you both.
We really love you and appreciate you. Thank you.